Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and as always, I'm joined on our state-of-the-art radio program by my first officer, Jeremy Graventon. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show, while Jeremy and I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before we may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, in the field of contract law, there is a doctrine known as caveat emptor. Now, caveat emptor comes from the Latin phrase meaning buyer beware. Let the buyer beware. And it applies to a purchaser. It protects a purchaser. It's basically allowing the purchaser to sell goods as is to protect he or she from being sued for a breach of either the implied warranty of merchantability or the implied warranty for fitness for a particular purpose. And now I'm sure some of you are wondering why I'm bringing up this contractual doctrine with respect to the presidential election cycle that's unfurling before our very eyes. Well, there is method to my madness. For you see, the doctrine of caveat emptor also applies to the arena of politics, particularly in a presidential election. You see, we warned that Donald Trump is essentially damaged goods. In other words, he is not who he claims to be. He does not, preach a message that is in line with true conservatism. His values do not line up with ours. And he has been a quaff-waffle. In other words, he is consistently inconsistent on every position since he officially threw his hat in the ring back in July of 2015. But one of the things with him is that there's so many who are within the rank and file of the disillusioned conservatives for whom he is the Pied Piper that just refuse to heed our warnings of the past 10 months straight. They thought that he would be great, that he would, as he put it, make America great again. Well, truth be told, that's a bunch of bunk. He didn't really believe any of that. He still doesn't believe any of that. And where it's really starting to come back to bite people who were interested in supporting him or people who went out of their way to endorse him is those congressional leaders that endorsed him. I'm speaking of people like California Representative Duncan Hunter, a man I once thought would be a good president. I have had to since change my perspective with respect to the California congressman because he did endorse Donald. So here's the interesting thing. As we are all aware, Donald Trump made that high-profile visit to Washington, D.C. on Thursday to meet with the king of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, House Speaker Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan. And when he was there, Duncan Hunter and some of the various other congressional leaders who endorsed the quaff-waffle thought it would be a great idea if the quaff-waffle could drop some of his maple dandruff-flavored syrup at their doorstep so that they could have essentially a photo op, and that way they could go back to their constituents and make a hullabaloo out of it. Well, here's the thing. Donnie didn't want to talk to who is being described as the rank and file of his congressional supporters. He didn't find value in it, much like he didn't find value in the United States Constitution. And so he snubbed them. And apparently this has Duncan Hunter all in a tizzy. He's very upset about this. He feels abandoned and betrayed. Well, I hate to tell you this there, little donkey, but we warned you. We warned you. We warned all of you that Donald J. Trump is not who he claims to be, that he is no way, shape, or form a conservative. But these people just don't care, Jeremy. It is beyond belief.
With the whole, caveat emptor and whatnot, I'm sure, this is where the lemon law kind of comes in as a remedy to that. There's a sale of goods that is not up to par or up to snuff as advertised, you have the lemon law. I think with Donald Trump, we can call it the orange law. I think it's perfectly fitting. Those can invoke now the orange law and say, well, this is not what we expected from him. So, we want our support back. We want our money back, so to speak. With regards to people like Duncan Hunter, here's the thing. You have nobody to blame but yourselves. As Randy said, we have been warning you of this defunct, malfunctioning merchandise known as the quaff-waffle Donald Trump for 10 months now, or even longer. In the grand scheme of things, much, much longer, because he's right along the lines of the Fabian Socialists. And here's the thing. You individuals that are upset because Trump is not what you expected him to be, but yet you're channeling your anger instead of at him, you're channeling it at people that warned you. That's kind of like saying, being warned not to put your hand on a hot stove, or not to play with a knife, and then you stab yourself in the leg with the knife, and then complain about it to the person who told you not to do it. You see, it's putting your hand on a hot stove, you're complaining because you get burned, but yet, instead of being mad at yourself for making that choice, you want to blame the people who told you not to do it. You can't do that. That is called shifting the blame. That is called, passing the buck, whatever cliche you want to use. Stop it. You're supposed to be grown individuals capable of exercising your rights and making a decision to vote on somebody in order to delegate your sovereign authority to them to govern over you. Stop doing it. Just stop. And stop blaming us. Because you continue to blame us, we're just going to throw it right back in your face, and it's not going to be egg that's on your face. It's going to be something far less gracious.
The media was all over the story, and basically Hunter was running to the media. It was as though he was having a temper tantrum of his own. Now, I knew that Donnie himself was basically akin to having those sorts of fits all the time. It seems to be just a part of his persona, maybe even a part of his modus operandi. But I was very surprised to see Duncan Hunter do that. Hunter used to be a very upstanding congressman. He used to have an outstanding, stellar conservative record. But remember what you have said, Jeremy, and indeed what I myself have said on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. If you sell out your principles and your values for someone that you think might get you this victory, that's the sort of betrayal that really sticks in the gall of the voters.
You're selling everybody else out.
Yeah. And I've even heard friends of mine with this sort of defeatist attitude that's been going around, like we covered in our audio blog today, say that it just proves now that we are in the minority. And I can't see that. I don't see that. I don't believe that to be the case. Because I think what it comes down to, what we're seeing is there are enough who have been convinced that their anger is righteous, and that it's a form of indignation, and that they are in the right to just burn everything down. But we've also warned that it's very dangerous to sit there and say that you can basically set all these brush fires when you're threatening to burn down the very nation itself. And we have no way to really replace the sort of representative republic that we have now, and that is a danger I think we could ill afford to have at this time. In fact, I know we could not afford it right now. The way things are playing out, it's just disastrous. But I can't believe that these congressmen wanted to have a brief meeting with Donald and then were upset when he didn't give it to them. Because essentially, they were useful idiots. They were pawns on Donnie's checkered board, since he said in The Art of the Deal that we don't need chess players anymore. And once their usefulness went up, they felt like the useful idiots that he truly believes that they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have to set this right now. Do not mistake us as adhering to our principles as being weak. Do not mistake that or our patience as weakness. Because, as history shows, the founding of our country and the preservation of our country during the first American Revolution, it was only a third of the population that stood against the British Crown and beat them back and defeated them. I guarantee you there are more of us now than there are of them back then. And there are certainly more of us who are going to be patient in adhering to our principles, having faith in each other to do so. Do not mistake that. Don't look at it as a sign of weakness. Don't lump us into the category of being the minority. If you do, it's going to be a fallacy. Now, I'm going to make another warning, Randy.
Okay.
Here's the thing. And I'm reluctant to do so because, obviously, people have not been heeding our warnings for the past 10 months. But I still have to make this warning kind of as a disclaimer type thing. And here it is. If you continue to go down this path and show the ignorance in abandoning your principles, it's not going to bode well for this nation at all. We've warned about Donald Trump. We've warned about his fallacies. We've warned about his facade that he's put up as supposedly being a conservative, this and that, and yet holding no principles under the Constitution. And here's the ultimate warning that comes with that. You want to burn the country down. You want to get rid of everything. Just like Randy said, we cannot afford to do that. We do not have anything in place. It would take so long to put something back in place to replace what we have as a constitutional representative republic. It will do more damage than it would to just ride this out. Stick to your principles, don't abandon them, because, again, history can show. Woodrow Wilson administration, people adhered to their principles. It gave us Calvin Coolidge, ultimately. And then FDR, people didn't abandon their principles. We had an individual many years later, such as Reagan in his first term. Do not abandon your principles. To do so, this is the warning. To do so, you will completely unmake the existence of our republic.
And going back to Hunter actually admitted several strange things in the course of a bitter message. Firstly, that he hasn't actually met Donald Trump in person, yet he has endorsed him. Then he said that, secondly, he was one of the first to endorse Donnie, as if a pecking order somehow matters with all of this. I'm going to come out and go out on a limb, folks, and say that there really shouldn't be a pecking order when it comes to endorsements. What is this? Some sort of royal aristocracy? That's counterproductive. That goes against everything that our nation stands for, and I'm rather shocked to see Duncan Hunter stoop to such a level. It's unfortunate, and I hope he comes back to terms, or else he is going to suffer this November as his constituency turns against him. But what the major odd thing that he said is that the reason that he wanted to meet with Trump is that it would be much easier to then go back to the constituents and say that, well, I've met the man that I endorsed in person, and no, he's really not that crazy. Yes, he actually used that word. He actually said so that he could convince his constituents that Donald Trump is not as crazy as he makes himself appear. I don't know about you, Jeremy, but I don't think I would call that a very glowing endorsement. In fact, I would say that that is the type of endorsement that one would not want to receive. Kind of like the endorsement that Krispy Kreme, the governor of New Jersey, Hamburger, gave to Mitt Romney when he gave that speech at the Republican National Convention back in 2012. It's that sort of almost self-interested type of endorsement that would hurt a candidate, but it's par for the course with Donnie. Donnie is all about himself. He's only ever been about himself and nothing else. And it's like something you mentioned in a conversation that we had outside of the program or just before we went on the air, about how there's this lack of looking for the better good in America, as though we are all just about personal gratification and that's it. Nothing else seems to matter.
Well, it's the idea behind true charity is what we were discussing, and how, political correctness, once again, has hijacked something that was, pure and true. And that's the problem. A lot of this, we can look at everything as being, damaged by political correctness. The people's thought process, their logical reasoning or lack thereof, and supporting somebody, abandoning their principles to support somebody who has no principles whatsoever. I mean, it's almost like the people want to flush the baby out with the toilet water. It's crazy. It's insane. So, and I think the problem with Duncan Hunter and, with this whole pecking order thing, well, I was one of the first to come out with own. It's almost like they're trying to say, well, I supported this person, and I want to make sure that the world knows that I supported them. That way, when it's time for them to put my head on the chopping block, they'll remember it. Because that's exactly what's going to happen. It's almost like they're trying to do this as a penance, so to speak, to save their own skin when, SHTF.
Think of it in the light of the French Revolution. How would this have worked with the French Revolution? It would have gotten him sent to the National Razor faster than anything else. And you see, that's the kind of thing. If we are going to have another revolution, I have a feeling it won't be the principled, sweet revolution like we had the first time. And believe me, folks, that was actually, from all of the historical records and from just how long and drawn out it was, that was a very bloody affair. But this would be 10
times worse.
Oh, it would be the French Revolution here in the United States. We would have a reign of terror. And I don't want that for my country. I don't want that for my fellow popular sovereigns. Just as I am sure the vast majority of our cherished listening passengers and audience don't want that for this nation or their friends and loved ones and their fellow Americans either.
No, and Randy, I've had the mindset before that, there has to be somewhat of a cleansing, so to speak. It's kind of like nature itself, with all these forest fires. It allows that particular area or region to grow a lot better, a lot stronger. But at the same time, we can't afford that right now. The timing is not right for that. And history dictates timing, as we've mentioned several episodes. And the problem is, a lot of people are under this mentality. It's like I mentioned in our audio blog earlier. If you can't beat them, join them. That's the kind of mentality that people are having right now. It's almost like, well, we couldn't get the candidate that we wanted, so we're just going to, vote for this candidate in hopes that he could save us. Stop looking for someone to save you. Stop looking for a messianic figure to step in and make everything better. The only way that your lives and this country is going to get better is if we, the people, do it ourselves. We have to have a true understanding and working knowledge of our shared Constitution. You follow the Constitution because that is the key. As we mentioned on previous episodes, that is the key. It is the whole mechanism that makes this country function.
And I find it amazing that Duncan Hunter is confused and hurt by this. Because again, it goes to the warnings that we've given for the past 10 months straight. And folks, do not give up faith. Do not give up hope. This is not the end of the conservative movement. The reason it's not the end of the conservative movement is, let's compare this to another movement that was dying about this time 100 years ago. That movement was known as the Progressive Movement. And it was founded by Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican, mind you. And the one thing that the Progressives had right, which it pains me to admit that they had anything right, But there was rampant corruption in the Republican Party. There was a détente wing even that far back in the history of the party, and they wanted to get rid of it. And the way they did it is they broke off and they formed a third party. Did that third party lose? Yes. But guess what it did? It meant that an obscure progressive on the Democrat side embraced everything that they demanded and made it a part of his entire candidacy, campaign, and presidency. Of course, that progressive and the progressive Democrat movement that got started was none other than Woodrow Wilson. Mm-hmm. And look at the damage that did to the country. Well, think of this as a reverse to that. Think of this as it being the century mark where the pendulum has to swing entirely in the opposite direction, because that's where we are. It's 104 years to the day. 104 years, it's now, as Jeremy said, in the cycle of history. Time for that type of movement to occur.
The whole thing is, it's just like you said, this would be a reverse to that. Now, out of progressivism, what did we have? Fabianism branched out of, or progressivism branched out of Fabianism, and all of that was spawned all this propaganda, the use of propaganda. With the muckraking during Teddy Roosevelt, principles of propaganda through Germany, which actually carried over into the American Socialist Party, so on and so forth. See, here's the thing that people don't understand when they hear propaganda. The term propaganda, it's automatically sets off as a red flag to them. Anything can be used as a red flag for any reason whatsoever. See, propaganda is nothing more than merely a vocational tool to be used. Now, depending on the individuals or entities that are using that tool, determines the outcome of good or evil which that tool is used, okay? So, if we were to take their propaganda, follow their patterns, and just the theories or the logic behind it, and implement it and use it for the advancement of the United States Constitution, the advancement of people having a working and understanding knowledge of our shared Constitution, the advancement and bolstering of conservatism, would you say that propaganda would be evil at that point? Well, no. The answer has to be no. Because it is completely diametrically opposed to the counterpart who would use it to destroy the Constitution. You have to fight fire with fire, folks, and that's what it's coming down to. The very last resort we have is burning this nation to the ground and trying to rebuild it from scratch. From scratch and the ground up, because that opens up so many doors and opportunities for our country to never be what it once was envisioned. Because just think about just the threats from other countries. Russia, China, even India, Pakistan. The Muslims and all the terrorists that want to do nothing but destroy the very fabric of what they hate. And that's true freedom.
Mm-hmm. They absolutely despise liberty. They despise our ability to think for ourselves, to act for ourselves, and to take responsibility. But there is a prevailing mindset, and this is due thanks to the people like Donnie Trump, who have just waved his hand through the air as if it would magically solve all of the problems that currently face this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, and have said, look, we are going to make America great again, insinuating that we ever lost our Constitution, insinuating that there is anyone who, that basically there's no one left to stand up for and defend the Constitution, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Here's the fact, folks. Donnie treats the people who endorsed him and the people who voted for him as he treated his ex-wives. He'll cheat on conservatism. He's already started that. Why? Because it's a conquest. And a man like him, who has an insatiable appetite, will always abandon the conquest once he's had it. He thrives on what he can't have. That's what he lives for. And again, this is why we say he's damaged goods. It's why we apply the contract law doctrine of caveat emptor on him. At this point, if you think about it, what we are facing is a purchase of candidates. 2 candidates, and they're both damaged goods.
Mm-hmm.
Do we necessarily have to be forced into that purchase? Why is it that they always make it to where we have to accept a bad deal? That makes no sense whatsoever, particularly when you're going at the aspect of it being free will or being self-determination, accountability, and responsibility.
Remember little Donnie's diatribe about comparing himself to that of a Vietnam soldier?
Yeah, on the Howard Stern show?
Yeah, and his conquest. And I believe he actually did say conquest of women. Now, folks, again, we brought all of these things up and reiterated his words to show just what kind of a person he is. And our warnings have still gone unheeded. If anything is a resounding red flag, again, it's just like Randy said, he's already begun to cheat on conservatism. He talked all these good lines. It's almost like him being at some nightclub and seeing, these very attractive females, or just a single attractive female. Whether she's single or not makes no difference, but to him, one attractive female that would actually be considered or made to look like the voting people of the United States, the voting constituency, okay? He gives you all these lines, all these pickup lines. Now I'm going to make America great. I'm going to build the wall just like I built the tower. I'm going to do this. We're going to kick ISIS's ass and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, he swoons that individual, gets them home and in bed, and then it turns out to be the worst one-night stand ever. That's what this is, folks. It is an impending doom of a one-night stand. And people could take that and make all the different analogies they want with that, but it's the fact of that individual was duped, was bamboozled by his smooth-talking, suave ways. And it's going to be a regretful moment for that individual's life, just like it's going to be a regretful moment, the buyer's remorse, because they failed to hear or adhere to caveat emptor.
Right, and caveat emptor really has to give us all of our values. Think of caveat emptor as being the bedrock principles that we have in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. It's there to tell us, look, vet these candidates wisely. Don't just go in a willy-nilly fashion and believe everything they say as if what they are saying is the honest-to-God's truth. Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't vet the candidates, and as we've stated on past episodes, the only applicable method or litmus test to use when vetting these candidates is the Constitution and their positions in relation thereto, then you're going to find yourself in an untenable situation like the United States is right now. And again, this is why we have been trying to warn you. Because what is going to happen is you're going to start to see Donnie becoming more and more like Hillary. There's a reason why they were dear, deep, close friends, and why he was her top donor when she was the senator from the state of New York. It's because they have shared values. It's because they view the world in the same light and fashion. And so, how can there be a lesser of two evils? How can we be aware of a better product? How can we think of anything that would be different when there is no difference between them? There is no space between them, and that, again, is why we say that caveat emptor has to come into place here. Because if we don't take that into consideration, we will just continue to give the gutless opposition party the green light to foist further worse candidates down our throats, as they have every election cycle thus far. Because think, back to 2008 we had John McCain, 2012 we had Mittens Romneykins, and now we have Donald Trump. I'm noticing that there's a further and further leftward push with each successive generation of candidates who managed to become the presumptive nominee and the eventual nominee of the Republican Party. And we are going to delve more into this comparison with caveat emptor as the program goes along, folks. Speaking of bad salesmen, and you'll be able to tie this into something, we'll get to the main part of this other bad salesman, but during the break between the segments, we had discussed this idea about how during the Dust Bowl of the Great Depression, there were these Oklahomans who were known as the Okies, who were headed to California, and there were used car salesmen, and I'll let Jeremy explain the rest of that.
Well, basically, with that situation, they would have these cars, and the used car salesman would actually take wood chips. And if the car was running rough or it wasn't shifting properly, whatever the malfunction was, they would put wood chips into the crankcase or into the transmission case to allow the slack to be taken up so it would feel like it was, functioning smoothly. With the Trump campaign, Trump is the used car salesman. He is the P.T. Barnum of the used car sales lot. Mm-hmm. His campaign itself is the defunct car. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a little added extra bonus in with his campaign, because I want to tie this in with, him making the statement that, he's willing to change for whatever reason in order to accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished. The problem is, it's his supporters are the Okies in the analogy, and what he's doing is, it's not just wood chips he's throwing there, but it's giant flakes of coffee dandruff in every aspect. He's putting in every orifice of the vehicle, his campaign, for his voters to think that everything's running smoothly. Problem is, when they get behind in the seat of the car, behind the steering wheel, well, in this case, where the steering wheel used to be, because that's what it's coming down to, folks. You're purchasing a vehicle that seems to have all the working parts, seems to function properly, except there's no way to steer it.
Well, it's like he would have thrown his dandruff into the steering mechanism, into the steering box itself, so that it can't steer.
Yeah. And
as if the steering knuckles were locked.
Sure, it's coming to the point where if everybody wants him to be the president, you really don't understand what you're wishing for. Mm-hmm. Because you're not going to be able to steer him. We, the people, delegate authority to the government to govern over us. With somebody like Trump and his ways of being able to change, or willingness to change, much like Obama's willingness to change with the winds of political fervor, whatever the case is, how are you going to be able to control him? You're not going to. He's going to say, well, you voted for me. I hold the power. I'm the government. I'm this and that. I'll just build a wall around you and your family to where you can't get out and there's nothing you can do. That's going to come down the pipe. Mark my words. Again, this is another warning that I give reluctantly, because I'm sure it's not going to be adhered to.
Yeah. And speaking of bad salesmen, RNC chair Reince Priebus has said several astounding things as of late. And one of those is he states that Christians shouldn't judge Donnie's past infidelities. After that, he then proceeded to attack Hillary Clinton on her past conduct and foibles. Folks, this plays into the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media's narrative. They're going to play this phony Republican war on women, and this ties directly into it, and Reince Priebus says that we shouldn't judge him based on that? Come on, Reince, you should do better than that. You should rinse yourself clean of these sorts of lies. but I see that you are incapable of doing so. But folks, what it really comes down to is we now find that the Republican Party in this post-truth campaign has become the party not only of betrayal, but the party of hypocrisy, a party of lies. And that sort of party cannot work. It will not work because, as we have stated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence the Wright Flyer, the truth always comes through in the end. It always shines through and penetrates these foibles that we see foisted upon us by these charlatans, these conmen, these hucksters, these snake oil salesmen and carnival barkers. And I hate to see that we have come to this. I hate to see that the United States of America is now in such a dilapidated state of disrepair because of this sort of madness. And really what it comes down to is we are facing a loss of decency. And not just decency, we are losing our self-identity at the same time that our Constitution is in dire peril and in dire straits because of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party refusing to stand up to all of the extra-constitutional actions taken by this Obama regime.
It's a very sad outlook. Almost to the point of to where it's beyond nauseating. It's like if you're sick, and bear with me, folks. I don't mean to be so visual about this, but it's almost like you have the flu, and you get the dry heaves. You know it has to come out. You want it to come out because you know that's what's going to make you better, but it just won't. That's how I'm feeling with the way things are going with this electoral process, this go around with the cycle. It's maddening. And what's more regarding, adding to that feeling of nausea and sickness is no matter how much we say, no matter how much effort we put into things, it's almost, and Randy and I have talked about this, it's almost to the point of, why do we even bother? Mm-hmm. If individuals are not going to adhere to what we're saying, not that we're the know-all and be-all of this whole cycle, this whole instance we have going on, yeah. But we do understand why people are mad. We understand that people want the problems fixed. We understand people want solutions. And again, why do we bother? Because we must. Well, because it's our birthright. It's ours to keep and protect and maintain. If we don't do this, who will?
And here's the other thing with Rents. He said that no one cares about Donnie's use of alter egos either. Well, Rents, we do care. Donnie's honesty is suspect. We don't believe he's conservative, and his past use of alter egos to twist the narrative in his favor for failed business dealings solidifies our belief in this matter. We understand that Paribas is in a real tight spot. I wouldn't want to have the job of having to spin for Trump. It would be like being in the spin cycle of a washing machine ad infinitum. Trump is consistently inconsistent, and Rents is trying to tell the people how to think, and that's the same thing which has made conservatives mad with respect to the GOP in election cycle after election cycle. They don't respect our ability to think for ourselves. They don't respect our self-determination, our self-will, our hopes, dreams, or aspirations. They simply tell us, like the Trumpidians are this time around, to shut the hell up, stand in line, and accept it. To be like Oliver Twist, "Thank you, sir, can I have another?" Well, no, I'm sick of it.
Yeah, well, and again, people like Eric Bolling, this Mr. Hurt individual, various others, Chucky Hurt, saying, well, just just shut up and fall in line. Well, why don't you shut up and go to hell?
Yeah.
It's that simple. Yeah, but Trump. Yeah, but go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's boiling down to. And they want to talk about, again, Trump claims that he's the great unifier. He's this, he's that. You're right, Trump. You are a unifier. You are unifying or uniting people against you. You are unifying the conservative base, the true constitutional principled conservative base, because we know you have no principles rooted in the Constitution. Just like Hillary has no principles rooted in the Constitution. Just like Bernie Sanders has no principles rooted in the Constitution. Or any other, as I mentioned before on our audio blog, evil reprobate of Satan has no principles rooted in the Constitution. And to make matters worse, that's bad enough, folks, but to make things worse, individuals who did have principles rooted in the Constitution, abandoning those principles to fall in line. This is why I made the analogy of the Israelites at the foot of Mount Sinai when Moses went up to get the Ten Commandments. What were they doing? They were a completely lawless group of individuals that just abandoned everything. Why? Just because it felt good. Because it felt empowering. You want to feel empowered, folks? Get yourself a copy of the United States Constitution. Read it. Grab yourself a dictionary to look up the words if you're not sure what they mean, or have an understanding or can't understand how they fit together. And I'm not trying to say this in a disparaging way. I'm saying this because I even have a copy of the Constitution, and I have a dictionary that I use with it, just so that I have a better understanding of how the words are used in the proper context.
You know, it seems that caveat emptor has to apply to the GOP as well, not just Trump-Vidian himself.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say this is when you look at what Trump has said, when he said that it's the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party. In other words, he's telling us that we should just accept his New York values and just do away with ourselves or go away, that we're not welcome anymore. And then when you have Reince Priebus saying that we don't care that he's saying these things or that he's had past dealings that go out of character with everything that we hold near and dear, that is diametrically opposed to this constitutionally endowed representative republic of ours. Yeah, no, people do care, Reince. That is why there is such a thing as the Never Trump movement. And yes, you are not going to overcome all of us. You are not going to silence us. But you see, that's the thing, Reince. You can go to hell because you're trying to tell us how to enact or exercise our fundamental and inalienable rights. No one has the right to do that to a popular sovereign, because remember that our rights end where another individual popular sovereign's rights begins, and that has always been the way that it is with this country. That is the way that our founding fathers intended for this country to run. But in this new GOP, again, we have to apply let the buyer beware, because what they're doing is they're trying to foist this unelectable sale of goods, these damaged goods onto us, and they're trying to tell us that it's the best thing since sliced bread. But we can see with our own very eyes that nothing could be further from the truth. And what is playing out here, right here and now, as we speak into our microphones, is we're seeing a battle for the soul of conservatism. They are attempting to snuff out the light of true constitutionalists and principled people all throughout this country. That is something we cannot afford. It's something we will not stand for. It is something we won't tolerate. But it means that we have to be more proactive as popular sovereigns, as the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. Because each and every fundamental and inalienable right we have is always couched with a duty, an obligation, and above all, a responsibility.
See, here's the problem with Reince Priebus, okay? And the GOP,
besides this dumb name,
yeah, and the GOP as a whole. This is why I don't have any party allegiance. Again, my allegiance is to God, the Constitution, my country, and my family, and then myself. the problem is they're saying, oh, well, you know, everybody has to unite behind Trump because we have to keep Hillary out of the White House. They're trying, and I'm not defending Hillary here in the least bit. We know what Hillary's all about. I've said this before, and Randy, you've said this before. We know the imminent threat that Hillary is.
Yeah.
The problem is Hillary, the threat that she is and the level of her behavior, it can be dealt with. Remember, we dealt with FDR. We dealt with LBJ. We dealt with Carter. We dealt with Clinton. Okay? We survived and are dealing with Obama. People say, well, nobody's doing anything to stop Obama. We the people. It falls on us. Now, here's the problem. Hillary's imminent threat and danger can be equated to as 20 individuals with fixed bayonets charging a machine gun nest in a weapons cache on a battlefield. Okay? That's easily dealt with. Easily dealt with. The problem that people are not understanding is we have Gomer Trump playing with a live hand grenade behind us, and he just dropped it. And it's getting ready to blow us all to kingdom come. What is the more imminent threat and danger? That's what I have to ask. The GOP is trying to place Hillary as being more of a danger than Donald Trump when we know for a fact he's more of a threat because he's unstable.
Well, more than that, he is actually going to be doing irreparable harm to the conservative movement.
Yes.
If you think about it, everybody who wants to sit there and say that they will tentatively support him because that's what we do, we unite behind our candidate come hell or high water, what you don't realize is that he fulfills every caricature and stereotype the left has ever created with respect to the right in an attempt to pigeonhole us and to use their twisted, dark machinations and propaganda to back us into a corner. Donnie fulfills that. And if you support him, you will, whether you like it or not, be lumped in with him. They will treat that as being you supporting him all the way, full-heartedly, full-throatedly, just like they did with the progressive Herbert Hoover. After all of the great work that was done by the true constitutionalist Calvin Coolidge, he went in and orchestrated these progressive responses to the Great Depression. But FDR, who had actually supported Hoover when he was first running, basically said that it was Hoover that did this, the Hoovervilles, all of that, and Hoover was a conservative, and that was used to lambast and attack conservatives well into the 1980s. And that is troubling. It's troubling because it shows that what they will try and do is silence constitutionalists. They'll try and paint us as, look, you guys were the ones that supported Donnie Trump, therefore your Trumpism is what damaged this country. It wasn't Obama. Obama didn't get to do everything that he wanted to do, and Trump really ruined it and really pushed things in the bad direction. And that means that if he wins, it will do more damage than if Hillary does. It absolutely would do more destruction to us, to the nation, and to the constitutionalist movement, and it would take a very long time for ourselves to dig ourselves out of the mess that he is creating.
Here's the thing. If Trump gets elected as president, he'll only be there for 4 years. That's it. He'll be there for 4 years. And you know who will replace him? Somebody that is 10 times worse than Hillary and Obama combined. Because the Democrats and the progressives and the Fabians will use, just like Randy said, well, Obama didn't get to accomplish everything because the Republicans and Trump, stepped in the way of that. Let's face it, folks, our society is getting dumber by the minute. Our voting base and population is getting dumber by the minute. Why? Because of three things: political correctness, revisionist history, and indoctrination of our youth. The more that those three things are allowed to thrive and remain a foothold on our sovereign individual existence, every single chance they get, they're going to revert right back to it, and it's going to come back 10 times harder. Mm-hmm. We know this because the Fabians are predictable. You look through history, every single chance that they were ousted, every time they were ousted, and they came back with a vengeance. Every single time.
And you know what it really comes down to is that the Constitution matters more than any candidate. It matters more than any political party or any movement. Our loyalty and our adherence needs to be to the Constitution. And the other thing about that is the Constitution matters more than any Supreme Court nomination or selection. Because if you actually stop and think about it, folks, we cannot just do this as instant gratification. We have to have a plan that would be long-reaching, one that goes back or reaches into the future within a century's worth of time. We may not see the end results in our lifetime. In fact, I'm fairly positive we won't. But here's the thing. We need to realize, with respect to the court, is that it was never meant to have the sort of power it has now. Instead of using a Band-Aid stopgap measure to keep, pushing forth this myth of John Marshall's wonderful idea of having judicial review, we need to go back to what the Constitution's all about. Because if you remember, the way that our federal government is designed to work is it must trace any and all of its authority back to a power which is specifically enumerated to it within the clear and concise language of our shared Constitution. What judicial review did was to take that and spin it on its head. You will not find judicial review within the clear language of Article 3, which is what designed and developed and basically outlined and mandated the powers of the Supreme Court. Folks, the Supreme Court, and I say this as an attorney, was an afterthought. It was in the broom closet of the Capitol building when it was first built. That's how much of an afterthought it is. And when you look at the language that was dedicated to it within the confines of the Constitution, Article 3 is shortest. It is meant to be the most limited. Yet here we are, thanks to Marbury versus Madison back in 1803, and we find that the Supreme Court is now the strongest branch of government. You see, we've got to get back to the true tenets of federalism.
And again, that all goes back to revisionist history and indoctrination and political correctness. That is what gave birth to this notion that people seem to cling to, that Supreme Court justices serve as a lifetime appointment. Show me in the Constitution where there's term limits pertaining to Supreme Court justices or any judge whatsoever. There's none, except this. The prerequisite is that they can hold their office under the exercising of good behavior. Now, what is defined as good behavior? Congress defines good behavior. Congress is the one that actually sets the standards for allowing them to serve on the bench. And good behavior simply can be classified as and defined as adhering to the Constitution, because the Supremacy Clause says so as much.
And since we're using a contract law analogy here, it's important to recall that no one is forced into a contract, because that is what we know as duress. Such contracts are not considered legal, they're not considered binding, and so if we draw it back to this whole erroneous and flawed notion of this election being the choice between the lesser of two evils, and that's why we just have to shut the hell up and accept it, and, Donnie ain't no perfect candidate, well, sure. But here's the thing. Neither one of the candidates are acceptable. They are both damaged goods, damaged to the point where they do not adhere to the Constitution. And that's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that we swear allegiance to or give our fealty to. And therefore, to say that we just need to vote for one or the other is duress. No one in a sale of goods is forced to purchase goods that are damaged. And it is our duty, our obligation and responsibility to say if the goods are damaged, then we don't let them in. We don't use them. We don't give them power. To do so would be asinine. It would be suicidal.
Well, it's a danger to the individual themselves.
Of course.
Think of this as somebody going out and buying a power tool. a circular saw, or hell, even better, a chainsaw. Now, because of various different lawsuits and so on and so forth, there has to be warning labels on certain products. Caution, wear eye protection. If you can't read this, then you should have wore your eye protection, whatever the case is. Now, let's say that somebody purchases a bad chainsaw. The bar on the chainsaw isn't quite lining up with the sprocket of the motor for the chain to ride on, so on and so forth. And they start to use it. And everything seems to be going good until they hit a knot in a tree or a log that they're trying to cut. And in this analogy, a knot would be, let's see, an impending threat or a declaration of war against the United States by some other country. Well, when you go to try and cut through that knot, all of a sudden the chain comes off, and it happens more often than not. If anybody has ever done logging or been involved with tree trimming and stuff like that, accidents happen. There have been people who have lost their limbs and even their lives due to the misuse of a chainsaw or chainsaw being bad. That's what Donald Trump is. He is a not quite fully functioning chainsaw. The chain is just a little too loose with him. And the first sign of any kind of hard material for him to have to cut through, that chain's going to come unhinged and undone, and guess what's going to happen? It's going to sever it's going to sever the legs and the arms and possibly even kill this republic.
Yeah, and the other thing that we have to tie in with the contract law analogy is silence is never assent. Silence is never an agreement. And think of this line that you and I and all of us have heard over and over again ad nauseum, that a vote against Donnie, no voting for Donnie, is proactively voting for Hillary. In a sense, what they're saying is your silence is a form of assent to Hillary Clinton and everything that she would be doing. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot have agreements by silence. That does not work. That would be a way to perpetrate fraud. Mm-hmm. That would be a way to destabilize a contract or to make people have to accept an unacceptable position. So you see, what it comes down to is there is a lot of duress, there is a lot of bullying going on, and it's all done out of fear-mongering. They're afraid of the people, and they are afraid of the thought of Hillary. But why be so afraid of that when you can realize that it is we the people that have the power and have always had the power to stand up to these thugs, these tyrants, these wannabe potentates and dictators and say no? You see, that is the duty and obligation and responsibility that falls on to we the people. It's what our founding fathers expected of us, and again, it's where that notion of caveat emptor comes in. Because not only is this caveat emptor, but they're trying to say, look, we know the goods are bad, you should just buy them anyway, shut up and buy it. Mm-hmm. It's almost as though they're holding a gun to our head, forcing us under the power of duress into an untenable or dangerous situation, much like the chainsaw analogy that Jeremy made there, and they are just going to drive that home as if that will solve all of our ills. But you see, by going along with that, we are empowering these nefarious forces that are holistically and diametrically opposed to all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic to go ahead and redouble on their efforts of forcing these unacceptable candidates down our throat. It's why we have seen that damaging course that I pointed out in the last segment with respect to John McCain and the various others, when it went from John McCain to Mitt Romney, now to Donnie Trumpelin. We see that Trumpelini is the worst of the bunch. He is the most radical. He is the most left-wing of them. And yet somehow the Branch Trumpidians are holistically convinced that he is some sort of grand conservative, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Everything about what he's done has been a lie. And that's why the alter egos matter there, Rinsey boy. So here's the deal. We all believe and we all enact and exercise the notion of caveat emptor. We are aware of these problems, and therefore we refuse to associate with them. We refuse to sell them or to purchase them or to do any type of business with them, because that would be to our own great detriment, and that is insufferable. But there's another aspect of caveat emptor that we're about to get to in just a minute, folks. Just hold on. Keeping with this theme of caveat emptor, we have to point to the claim of unity also being damaged goods, so to speak. To emphasize this point, one merely needs to look at the lopsided Nebraska GOP vote of some 400-odd votes to 8 to reprimand principled constitutionalist Ben Sasse. The point of contention here is that Sasse is refusing to support the presumptive nominee of the gutless opposition party, or GOP. What's interesting, or rather hypocritical, is that the same is not being said of Speaker Ryan, a dyed-in-the-wool member of the detente wing, who has also refused, at least at this point, to endorse the Donald.
It's kind of hard to believe anything that comes from Paul Benedict Arnold Ryan's mouth anyways. I mean, look at what he did. You know, his actions are exactly what Donald Trump used to manipulate his supporters. You know, people were pissed because of Paul Ryan, becoming Speaker of the House, this and that, and then paving the way for Obama to get things done, and stepping aside instead of holding him accountable. Of course, people are angry about that. I'm angry about that. But again, Donald Trump saw that as a golden opportunity to jump in and manipulate people with it. Mm-hmm. And it's like you said, it's hypocritical of Paul Benedict Arnold Ryan to do this. There's hypocrisy with Duncan Hunter. There's the hypocrisy with Mitch McConnell, Jeff Sessions,
Reince Priebus,
the John Tammy Faye Boehner.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just it's ridiculous. But yet, we're the ones, us conservatives who adhere to the Constitution, we're the ones to blame, or we're the ones that are going to be blamed for Hillary getting elected, because we won't just shut the hell up and get in line. Well, guess what?
It's because we're their favorite scapegoats. Look,
sure.
They've done this every election cycle. What did they do after Bob Dole? Oh, it's the conservatives. What did they do when George H.W. Bush lost? Oh, it was the conservatives who went for Ross Perot. Well, why did they? Could it be that he lied? Could it be that all of these people were lying and that the people are getting fed up with it? But you see, the anger now, and the amazing thing now is that Donald Trump has managed to convince these people that he is something that he's never been. That he is some sort of conservative, that he's going to change and become presidential, and he's going to really just mop the floor with Hillary Clinton. I don't see it, folks. I just don't. Because he has never been that in the vast majority of his 70 years on this earth. You're not going to change that quickly. So again, caveat emptor has to come in. But what was done to Senator Sasse is beyond belief. I don't think I've ever, in my studies of history, seen a time or moment in the history of American polity where a state party has gone out of its way to reprimand someone just for their beliefs alone. Why? Because he supported Ted Cruz? Why? Because he's willing to do what he thinks is right? What he thinks that the constituents put him there to do? Give me an ever-loving break that this is now something that could be reprimanded. This is the world being turned topsy-turvy, upside down, and on top of its head for what? What does it accomplish? The GOP really does need to do some explaining here. And I think that the ones who should be reprimanded are the ones who attempted to reprimand Ben Sasse. Shame on you, you charlatans. May you all go to hell and rot there forever and all eternity.
Well, I'll tell you exactly why he was reprimanded, Randy. because he refuses to abandon his principles. That's it. He will not abandon his principles. Period. Now, all these charlatans, these golden ticket holders that are going to be escorted by the Trumpaloompas straight to the fiery pits of hell, where they should go, in their special seats reserved to them between pedophiles and people that talk in a movie theater.
Unless the movie's bad, then people that talk, they're fine.
Yeah. But the point is, using their logic, if these individuals are willing to attack one individual that is adhering to his principles and not backing down, never giving up, never abandoning his principles, what is stopping them from gathering together, coming together and unifying, and coming after we the people that will never abandon our principles? They want to say that we're becoming the minority. Fine. You know what? I've always favored the underdog. Because, folks, I'm going to tell you right now, those of us that will never abandon our principles, those of us that will never back down, those of us that will never give up, we will always prevail. Why? Because our principles are rooted in natural law. And natural law is the alpha and the omega. It is always existent. It will always be existent. And the tenets of the Constitution will always be there. Always Constitution, folks. Never Trump. Never GOP. Never evil. Never abandon your principles. Always Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's got to be that way. And, you know, it's still amazing that we have seen this unprecedented wave just unleashed on the American people. That we've seen this act of betrayal, this act of hypocrisy that is just running rampant all throughout the Republican Party. And you see, they say that we have to vote against conservatism essentially to save conservatism. But at the same time, Donnie's out there saying that it isn't the Conservative Party, it's the Republican Party. Why is it that this is not being called out? Why did Reince Priebus say this is unacceptable? How is this the party of unity when it is anything but? This is divisiveness. And that is the problem that we've had with Donald Trump throughout this 2016 election cycle. He has gone out of his way to act in such a way as to fling mud, as to divide people against one another, and to accomplish what? I think it is to pave the path for Hillary. I think it's to give her whatever she needs to ensure that she can continue to just waltz into the White House. Because, after all, haven't they been friends for decades now? Hasn't that been the modus operandi of Trump being her biggest donor back when she was a senator, supposedly from the state of New York? These are the sorts of things that need to be taken into consideration. Because, believe it or not, actions do have consequences. And Trump's past actions should have consequences. But the Branch Trumpidians don't want there to be consequences. They don't want you to consider that there were ever consequences. And I have to ask, why the hell not? Why should we simply allow his foibles to go forth unmolested, as if that's a good idea, when he's sitting there saying that it is not the party of conservatives, when he's trying to tell us that we need to be pigeonholed into his New York values? Well, last I checked, the President of the United States of America is supposed to represent all Americans. Wouldn't you say that American values ought to trump those New York values? Trumpy boy? And Reince, why don't you explain this? You say people don't care? Bovine excrement. I care. Jeremy cares. Our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, cares. I'm sure the vast majority of our cherished listening passengers and audience care. We're tired of being told that we should just shut up, that our vote and our voice doesn't matter. When the hell did that become an American principle? When the hell did that become an American value? Because I'm going to tell you right now, it sure as hell is not a value that I hold or adhere to, and it sure as hell not a value I am safe to say that Jeremy holds or values or adheres to.
Oh, I can tell you when it came to that level. It's when all these Trump supporters started calling you, me, and various other individuals that do not support Trump traitors, anti-American. Oh, you're un-American. And they do this as to place themselves up above everybody else, as if they're better than anybody else. Again, folks, aren't we all supposed to be Americans? Aren't we all supposed to adhere to the same values and principles that once established this country? That we each have an obligation to ourselves and each other to maintain? Why do you feel the need to place yourself above anybody else? Why do you think that you're superior to anybody else? You sit there and you rail against elitism, you rail against cronyism, but yet you are espousing the very things that you rail against. You are all hypocrites when you do that.
They certainly go out and support the man that has empowered that. They certainly go out and support the man who has been greasing the palms of these corrupt politicians for 30 years. Just who was it that funded the Gang of Eight bill? Folks, it was none other than Donaldoff Trumpolini. He has always been the one that has carried out those twisted machinations. And that, it just goes to show, how can you be in support of him when you claim to be against this? How can you gang up on an individual that stood their ground for speaking his mind? Didn't they say that, oh, we support Trump because he speaks his mind, because he's not afraid to say what crosses that little quaff brain of his? Well, here's the thing. You're attacking Ben Sass for speaking his mind. You're attacking principled conservatives of the Never Trump movement who are speaking their mind. Why do you need to have this collectivist mentality? Or is it that you have always been a bunch of Fabian socialists, that you're a bunch of closeted progressives, and you always have been? Is that what it is? Is that what it really is coming down to? Because you need to come to terms with that.
I think what it is, Randy, is that they're so willing to abandon their principles and not stand on anything, and they're willing to fall for anything and everything that comes down the pipe. They fell for Donald Trump's suave, debonair speeches. And even Trump said himself, if one of my rallies seems to not be going the way I'd like it to, I just tell them I'm going to build a wall and the place goes nuts. You all these Trump supporters have been duped. They are willing to abandon their principles, and they think that because they've abandoned their principles, that everybody else should follow suit. Why? So that they don't look like the fools that they are. They don't want to be left in their own misery to waffle in and roll around in like a bunch of leprosy plagued pigs wallowing in the mud because they're going to look like the fools. See, this is the problem. These are the types of individuals that are dangerous. These individuals want to say, well, you know what? Hey, you don't want to do with what I do? Guess what? I'm going down. I'm going to take you down with me. That's that collectivist mentality. That's the same mentality that brought about the Bolsheviks in Russia. It's the same mentality that gave rise to Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany. And every other despotic, dictatorial country where their liberties and freedoms were smited from them and wiped out in the blink of an eye because people abandoned their principles. They refused to speak up. Because they refused to speak up, that meant they refused to act, and when they failed to act, they were enslaved. And all these same individuals want to say, well, it's my First Amendment speech. Again, exercising your First Amendment to oppress me is a violation of my rights. You cannot violate my rights in order to exercise yours. That's called committing a crime.
You know, there is one thing that Trump is right about. He is redefining the Republican Party. It is now acceptable to try and gang up on those who disagree with you. It is now acceptable to try and become a lockstepping, goose-stepping, sort of fascistic type of organization that we see with the Democrat Party that has unquestionably been dominated and taken over by the Fabian socialists. And Reince Priebus tells us just, don't judge that. Don't consider that a problem. Don't think that that is a realistic problem that is facing each and every one of us on a day-to-day basis. But when you look at this country, things are falling apart. And the only way to save the country is to realize that you yourself as popular sovereigns are the only ones endowed with the proper authority to save this country. Stop looking for a savior. You're not going to find a Messiah. The Messiah is Jesus Christ. Anyone else is going to be penultimate. It comes down to we the people by the very design of our representative republic. It's why our Constitution is the longest contiguous running constitutional document in all of world history. Our government was open and honest, and it worked. It was a fair system. It's lost a lot of that. Why? Because we've divorced ourselves from the Constitution, because we have allowed these charlatans and these hucksters to continue to make it to where we are left with no choice but the alleged lesser of two evils. Look, folks, if you are given two evils to choose from, choose neither. That's really what it comes down to. It is our duty, our obligation, our responsibility. Where are we? Why are we allowing this to happen? Well, the way you want to stop this, if you really want to stop this, there is something you can do. You don't vote for that which assumes a position which is diametrically opposed to your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, your ability to thrive and prosper. Because what is one of the greatest fundamental and inalienable rights we have if it is not the pursuit of happiness?
And it's like the saying goes, the Lord helps those that help themselves. Okay? And it's very simple. See, we were given free will. And with free will came the ability to make sound, principled, logical choices. Now, if you adhere to the principles rooted deeply in the United States Constitution, our shared United States Constitution, and you follow those principles, you make your choice based on those principles, you have nothing to worry about with your conscience. Because, see, your conscience is an extension of your free will. If you're willing to abandon your principles, now you are silencing your conscience, is what you were doing. People want to talk about, the silent vote, not voting for Trump is a silent vote for Hillary. Wrong, because here's the thing. I will never abandon my principles. I will always vote in accordance with my principles. And when given two choices of evil, both of which have no principles rooted in the United States Constitution, and if I choose to vote for either one of them, I'm abandoning my principles. If I vote for my principles, because my vote is never cast for an individual. My vote is cast for the principles that that individual espouses.
It's like the old saying that you don't respect the man, you respect the office. That's why you would always salute the office of President of the United States.
Yes.
That's why you would always stand up when All Hail the Chief plays. It's because it's meant to be greater than we ourselves. And it was meant to be something of importance, something that spoke to the true nature of what it is to be an American citizen, what it is to be a popular sovereign. And we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, stand solidly in the corner with Ben Sasse. No matter what these Nebraska charlatans attempt to do, or attempt to go after him, or attempt to silence the voice of those who are speaking from reason and logic and care and concern for this country, we stand in solidarity and unity with them. Folks, the battle lines are being drawn. And we were not the ones to start this. We didn't instigate this. We didn't create this. That falls on the Trumpidians and their quaff-waffling master. We don't have any say with that. We don't have any connection with that. We are doing our best to resist that, to ensure that the vitality and validity of the conservative movement does not simply fade into the annals of history as some quaint failure.
because ultimately it cannot fail. We have no choice but to have it succeed, because if it fails, that means our nation dies. That means our experiment in this great representative republic that is devoted to liberty fails as well. And we would be the laughingstock of history for ever allowing that to come to fruition.
Now, I want to touch on something about Randy saying that the office of the presidency, and I'm going to take it even deeper than that, every elected office of the body politic was meant and inspired to be greater than ourselves. And I'm going to tie this right back into the Constitution. Right to the preamble. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. That is what is meant by that. A more perfect union means embracing and perpetuating the idea, the envisionment of those offices serving our country, serving we the people, putting that above ourselves. It's greater than ourselves. And furthermore, when it mentions our posterity, our future generations, it is establishing that greatness for our future generations. That is what is meant by that. A lot of people don't understand. They want to interpret that as some kind of earthly perfection. There's no such thing as earthly perfection. There never has been, there never will be. The only perfection is heavenly bound. That is why it says a more perfect, meaning to achieve the greatness as close to perfection as humanly possible, meaning placing those held offices above ourselves. We don't serve ourselves in those offices. Those that hold those offices serve we the people, because it is government by the consent of the governed. And the only way that that can be held true is if people adhere to their principles and delegated that authority in a logical, moral, and ethical fashion, in a principled fashion rooted in the Constitution. Failure to do that is a sure abatement of your liberty, your freedom, your life, your posterity, and the overall existence of our republic.
Because it ultimately falls onto us as popular sovereigns to maintain the Union. Think of it as this way, going back to a contractual notion. Each and every one of us, by right of birth or by right of naturalization, are the beneficiaries of the greatest contract that has ever been devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above. And what that comes down to mean is that we also have to accept the terms and conditions that apply. And the terms and conditions that apply, other than caveat emptor with these elected officials, is that we agree to support the system, that we agree to further a notion in which our fundamental and inalienable rights are protected, and that we have an open and honest government. And the way to do that is that we have to vet the candidates, we have to be proactive in the election cycle that is the process through which these candidates are chosen, and we must do our utmost to protect it from the frauds and charlatans that would attempt to bring in tyranny, despotism, and any other form of twisted oppression. But, folks, I haven't seen that to a great degree in this election cycle. I've seen a wannabe potentate that just cares about himself attempting to hostily take over and hijack a political party and movement.
See, I want to kind of still stay on this contractual basis here. With any contract, there's three conditions that must be met. There's an offer, an acceptance, and a consideration. Not particular in that order. Offer, consideration, and acceptance. The offer is... Here's the offer.
Well, actually, it does have to be in a particular order. It has to be offer, acceptance, and consideration.
Right.
And the consideration is an exchange of legal deficits.
Right.
In other words, I lessen myself, you lessen yourself to come to a mutual agreement.
Here's the offer. Okay? The offer is, we the people will delegate authority to certain individuals to make laws that will govern over us. The acceptance is when those individuals raise their hand and they take that oath to uphold, protect, and defend the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and faithfully execute the duties of that office. The consideration, knowing that if they violate that oath, they will be in breach of contract and will have to be held accountable by we the people, the other party of that contract. That's it. It's very simplistic, folks. And guess what? The bylaws of that contract, the very contract itself, is the United States Constitution. Again, pointing back to, that is the key. That is the solution. And again, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, we always strive to offer up more than just the issues at hand. We offer up solutions. And the ultimate solution is getting back to strict adherence to the United States Constitution, our shared birthright document that ensures our rights, our fundamental liberties, and freedoms rooted in natural law.
Yeah. It comes down to being the most important thing we have. Because if we don't have our rights, if we ignore the contractual obligations that exist, because as was mentioned, consideration means that each of us have assumed a legal detriment. The legal detriment for the politicians being that they would face our wrath, and the legal detriment to us is if we don't uphold it, and if we don't live and abide by it, we are sure to lose our liberty. We are sure to lose our rights. You see, the only ones who will protect our rights is we the people, because we are the only ones that are invested in them. We are the only ones that care what the outcome is, and that is why, once again, caveat emptor comes into play. It's very important here. We see the deleterious impact that Trump has been having on our system of polity. We see that he is unraveling everything that we care about. And that is something we can't allow. Again, it is that contractual obligation.
Yes. And furthermore, it's just like in the Fifth Amendment where it says the rights of life, liberty, and property shall not be deprived without due process of law. Now, it's mentioned in that order for a specific reason. A, because without life, you have no liberty. And without liberty, you are not able to obtain property. Now, let's work it backwards. If you're willing to forego your property and forfeit your property,
to forego your liberty,
that automatically makes you willing to forgive your liberty, and most assuredly, your life will follow.
It's a dangerous situation that we are facing in this nation right now. And yes, I understand that there is fear of Hillary. We know Hillary is terrible. But here's the thing. Donnie is just Hillary with a different appendage in between his legs. I hate to say it that way. I hate to be crass, but it's true. He is no different. There is no lesser of two evils in this race.
Well, he does make the pantsuit look a little bit better than she does.
I don't know about that. His suits are pretty ill-fitting. But what it comes down to is that we have to adhere to the Constitution. We have to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of it, thereby gaining a full understanding of our fundamental and inalienable rights. Because if you think about it, what is the whole purpose of the contract if it isn't to protect our rights, our liberties, and all that they stand for and represent? It comes down to being a strict obligation on each and every one of us in our capacity as popular sovereigns, as the wielders of power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. Now, again, we understand that that is not an easy burden to bear. It's not an easy cross to carry, but it is our cross to carry, because if you think about the rewards that attach to it, being able to live free, being able to be the masters of our own destiny, unlike any other nation on earth, that is an incredible power, it's an incredible freedom, and it's something that only we here in the United States have. And we cannot allow that to just go by the wayside, because we are the last bastion and the last great hope of liberty anywhere left on this earth. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back. No, our alcohol is not sold as is. We do have warranties with it. It will make you feel better. With that said, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and as always, I'm joined by my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. We'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We also invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. And on top of that, we invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find our departure board, which lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, our blog spot where you can find those wonderful audio blogs, and our Cafe Press account, which also is not a buyer beware. Tell them a little bit about it.
Well, you can rest assured with your contribution to our Cafe Press account that you will be happy with the merchandise therein. And folks, I'm going to tell you right now, if at any point in time you think you may not be happy with the merchandise, don't buy it. Because we don't want you to not have the enlightenment of parading yourself around or showing off your contributions to your friends as a loyal first-class passenger or just a regular, follower who's just along for the ride, so on and so forth, with our apparel, or during your dinner parties with the nice drinking glasses with our logos, first the original logo and our first-class passenger logo.
In fact, I think they have a return policy. So
I think they do too.
Yeah, so you see, it's not caveat emptor. All right, folks. As always, it's been a pleasure. We'll see you next time. Do take care.